Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 583rd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the prince of the Jinn said to the prince of mankind, When thou art quit of thy complaint, thou shalt return to thy folk in less than the twinkling of an eye. And the king's son rejoiced. They fared on all that night till the morning morrowed, when, lo, they found themselves in a green and smiling country, full of trees spiring, and birds quiring, and garths, fruit growing, and palaces high showing, and waters a-flowing, and odoriferous flowers blowing. Here the son of the Jinn alighted from his steed, and bidding the prince to do the like, took him by the hand, and carried him into one of the palaces, where he found a great king and puissant sultan, and abode with him all that day, eating and drinking till nightfall. Then the king's son of the Jinn mounted his courser, and taking the prince up behind him, fared on swiftly through the murks and glooms until morning, when, lo, they found themselves in a dark land and a desert, full of black rocks and stones, as it were a piece of hell. And the prince asked the Jinni, What is the name of this land? Answered the other, It is called the Black Country, and belongs to one of the kings of the Jinn by name Zul-Janhan, against whom none of the other kings may prevail, neither may any enter his domains except by his permit. So tarry thou here whilst I go ask leave. So saying, he went away, and returning after a while, they fared on again, till they ended at a spring of water, welling forth of a black rock. And the king's son of the Jinn said to the king's son of the men, All right. He dismounted, and others cried, Drink of this water. So he drank of the spring without stay or delay, and no sooner had he done so, by the grace of Allah, he became a man as before. At this he joyed with exceeding joy, and asked the Jinni, My brother, how was this spring called? Answered the other, It is called the women's spring, for that no woman drinketh thereof, but she becometh a man. Wherefore do thou praise Allah the Most High, and thank him for thy restoration and mount. So the prince prostrated himself in gratitude to the Almighty, after which he mounted again, and they fared on diligently all that day, till they returned to the Jinni's house, and the prince passed the night in all solace of life. They spent the next day in eating and drinking till nightfall, when the king's son of the Jinn asked the prince, Hast thou a mind to return to thy people this very night? Yes, he answered, for indeed I long for them. Then the Jinni called one of his father's slaves, Raji's height, and said to him, Take this young man mounted on thy shoulders, and let not the day dawn ere he be with his father-in-law and his wife. Replied the slave, Hearkening and obedience, and with love and gladness, and upon my head and eyes. Then withdrawing a while, reappeared in the form of an Ifrit. When the prince saw this, he lost his senses for affright, but the Jinni said to him, Fear not, no harm shall befall thee. Mount thy horse, and leap him onto the Ifrit's shoulders. Nay, answered he, I will leave my horse with thee, and bestride his shoulders myself. So he bestrode the Ifrit's shoulders, and when the Jinni cried, Close thine eyes, O my lord, and be not a craven, he strengthened his heart, and he shut his eyes. Thereupon the Ifrit rose with him into the air, and ceased not to fly between sky and earth, whilst the prince was unconscious, nor was the last third of the night come before he lighted down with him on the terrace roof of his father-in-law's palace. Then said the Ifrit, Dismount and open thine eyes, for this is the palace of thy father-in-law and his daughter. So he came down, and the Ifrit flew away and left him on the roof of the palace. When the day broke, and the prince recovered from his troubles, he descended into the palace, and as his father-in-law caught sight of him, he came to meet him, and marveled to see him descend from the roof of the palace, saying, We see folk enter by the doors, but thou comest from the skies. Quoth the prince, Whatso Allah, may he be extolled and exalted, willeth, that cometh to pass. And he told him, excuse me, he told him all that had befallen him from first to last, whereat the king marveled and rejoiced in his safety. And as soon as the sun rose, bade his Wazir make him ready splendid bride feast. So did he, and they held the marriage festival, after which the prince went in unto his bride, and abode with her 2 months, then departed with her for his father's capital. As for the damsel's cousin, he died forthright of envy and jealousy. When the prince and his bride drew near his father's city, the king came out to meet him with his troops and Wazirs, and so Allah, blessed and extolled be he, enabled the prince to prevail against his bride's cousin and his father's minister. And I pray the Almighty, added the damsel, to aid thee against thy Wazirs, O king, and beseech thee to do me justice on thy son. When the king heard this, he bade put his son to death. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 584th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the favourite had told her tale to the king, she said, I beseech thee to do me justice by putting thy son to death. Now, this was the 4th day, so the 4th Wazir entered, and kissing the ground before him, said, Allah establish and protect the king. O king, be deliberate in doing this thou art resolved upon, for the wise man doth not till he hath considered the issue thereof, and the proverb saith, Whoso looketh not to his actions' end hath not the world to friend, and whoso acteth without consideration, there befalleth him what befall the Hamman-Keeper and his wife. And what betided him? asked the king. And the Wazir answered, I have heard tell, O king, a tale of the Wazir's son and the Hamman-Keeper's wife. There was once a bath-keeper to whom resorted the nobles of the folk and headmen, and one day there came into him a handsome youth of the sons of Wazirs, who was fat and bulky of body. So he stood to serve him, and when the young man put off his clothes, he saw not his yard, for that it was hidden between his thighs, by reason of the excess of his fat. And there appeared thereof but what was like unto a filbert. At this the bath-keeper fell a-lamenting, and smiting hand upon hand, which when the youth saw, he said unto him, What ails thee, O bath-keeper, to lament thus? And he answered, saying, O my lord, my lamentation is for thee, because thou art in sore straits for all thy fair fortune and goodliness and exceeding comeliness, seeing that thou hast not withal to do, and receive delight like unto other men. Quoth the youth, Thou sayest sooth, but thou mindest me of somewhat I had forgotten. What is that? asked the bath-keeper, and the youth answered, Take this gold piece, and fetch me a pretty woman, that I may prove my nature on her. So he took the money, and betaking himself to his wife, said to her, O woman, there is come to me in the bath a young man of the sons of the Wazirs, as he were the moon on the fullest night, but he hath no prickle like other men, for that which he hath is some small matter like unto a filbert. I lamented over his youth, and he gave me this dinar, and asked me to fetch him a woman on whom he might approve himself. Now thou art worthier of the money than another, and from this no harm shall betide us, for I will protect thee. So do thou sit with him a while, and laugh at him, and take his dinar from him. So the good wife took the dinar, and rising adorned herself, and donned the richest of her raiment. Now she was the fairest woman of her time. Then she went out with her husband, and he carried her into the Wazir's son in the privy place. When she came in to him, she looked at him, and finding him a handsome youth, fair of favour as he were the moon at full, was confounded at his beauty and loveliness. And on like wise his heart and wit were amazed at the first sight of her, and the sweetness of her smile. So he rose forthright, and locking the door, took the damsel in his arms, and pressed her to his bosom, and they embraced. Whereupon the young man's yard swelled, and rose on the end, as it were that of a jackass. And he rode upon her breast, and fettered her, whilst she sobbed, and sighing, and writhed, and wriggled under him. Now the bath-keeper was standing behind the door, awaiting what should betide between them, and he began to call her, saying, O Abdallah, enough! Come out of the day as long upon the sucking child. Quoth the youth, Go forth to thy boy, and come back. But quoth she, If I go forth from thee, my soul will depart my body. As regards the child, so I must either leave him to die of weeping, or let him be reared an orphan without a mother. So she ceased not to abide with him till he had done his desire of her 10 times running, while her husband stood at the door calling her and crying out and weeping and imploring succor. But none came to aid him, and he ceased not to do thus, saying, I will slay myself, till at last, finding no way of access to his wife, and being distraught with rage and jealousy to hear sighing and murmuring and breathing hard unto the young man, he went up to the top of the bath, and casting himself down therefrom, died. Moreover, O king, continued the Wazir, there reached me another story of the malice of women. What is that? Asked the king. And the Wazir said, Know, O king, that it is anent, the wife's device to cheat her husband. There was once a woman who had no equal in her day for beauty and loveliness, and grace and perfection, and a certain lewd youth and an obscene setting eyes on her fell in love with her, and loved her with exceeding passion. But she was chaste, and inclined not to adultery. It chanced one day that her husband went on a journey to a certain town, whereupon the young man fell to sending to her many times a day, but she made him no reply. At last he resorted to an old woman, who dwelt hard by, and after saluting her, he sat down and complained to her of his suffering for love of the woman, and his longing to enjoy her. Quoth she, I will warrant thee this, no harm shall befall thee, for I will surely bring thee to thy desire, Inshallah, and it please Allah the Most High. At these words he gave her a dinar and went his way. When the morning morrowed, she appeared before the woman, and renewed an old acquaintance with her, fell to visiting it her daily, eating the undertime with her, and the evening meal, and carrying away food for her children. Moreover, she used to sport and jest with her, till the wife became corrupted, and could not endure an hour without her company. Now she was wont, when she left the lady's house, to take bread and fat, wherewith she mixed a little pepper, and to feed a bitch that was in that quarter, and thus she did day by day, till the bitch became fond of her, and followed her whenever she went. One day she took a cake of dough, and putting therein an overdose of pepper, gave it to the bitch to eat, whereupon the beast's eyes began to shed tears for the heat of the pepper, and she followed the old woman weeping. When the lady saw this, she was amazed, and asked the ancient, O my mother, what ails this bitch to weep? Answered she, Learn, O my heart's love, that hers is a strange story. Know that she was once a close friend of mine, a lovely and accomplished young lady, a model of comeliness and perfect grace. A young Nazarene of the quarter fell in love with her, and his passion and pining increased on him, till he took to his pillow, and he sent to her times manifold, begging her to have compassion on him and show him mercy. But she refused, albeit I gave her good counsel, saying, O my daughter, have pity on him, and be kind, and consent to all he wisheth. She gave no heed to my advice, until the young man's patience failing him, he complained at last to one of his friends, who cast an enchantment on her, and changed her human shape into canine form. When she saw what transformation had befallen her, and that there was none to pity her case save myself, she came to my house, and began to fawn on me, and buss my hands and feet, and whine and shed tears, till I recognized her, and said to her, How often did I warn thee? But my advice profit thee not. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 585th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the old trot related to the young lady the tale of the bitch, and recounted the case and her cunning and deceit, with the view to gain her consent, and said to her, When the enchanted beast came to me and wept, I reminded her, How often did I not warn thee? But my advice profited thee not. However, O my daughter, seeing her misery, I had compassion on her case, and kept her by me. And as often as she bethinketh herself of her former estate, she weepeth thus, in pity for herself. When the lady heard this, she was taken with great alarm, and said, O my mother, by Allah, thou affrightest me with this story. Why so? Asked the old woman. Answered the lady, Because a certain handsome young man fell in love with me, and hath sent me many times to me, but hitherto I have repelled him. And now I fear lest there befall me the like of what befell this bitch. "O my daughter," rejoined the old woman, "look thou to what I counsel thee, and beware of crossing me, for I am in great fear for thee. If thou know not his abiding place, describe his semblance to me, that I may fetch him to thee, and let not any one's heart be angered against thee." So the lady described him to her, and she showed him not to know him, and said, "When I go out, I will ask after him." But when she left the lady, she went straight to the young man, and said to him, "Be of good cheer, for I have played with the girl's wits. So tomorrow at noon wait thou at the head of the street, till I come and carry thee to her house, where thou shalt take thine ease with her, and the rest of the day and all night long." At this the young man rejoiced with exceeding joy, and gave her 2 dinars, saying, "When I have won my wish of her, I will give thee 10 gold pieces." Then she returned to the lady, and said to her, "I have seen him, and spoken with him on this matter. I found him exceeding wroth with thee, and minded to do thee a harm, but I plied him with fair words, till he agreed to come tomorrow at the time of the call to noon prayer." When the lady heard this, she rejoiced exceedingly, and said, "O my mother, if he keep his promise, I will give thee 10 dinars. Quoth the old woman, "Look to his coming from none but from me." When the next morn morrowed, she said to the lady, "Make ready the early meal, and forget not the wine, and adorn thyself, and don thy richest dress and decoration, whilst I go and fetch him to thee." So she clad herself in her finest finery, and prepared food, whilst the old woman went out to look for the young man, who came not. So she went around searching for him, but could come by no news of him. And she said to herself, "What is to be done? Shall the food and drink she hath gotten ready be wasted, and I lose the gold pieces she promised me? Indeed, I will not allow my cunning contrivance to come to naught, but will look her another man and carry her to him." So she walked about the highways till her eyes fell on a pretty fellow, young and distinguished looking, to whom the folk bowed, and who bore in his face and traces of travel. She went up to him, and saluting him, and asked, "Hast thou mind to meat and drink with a girl adorned and ready?" Answered he, "What is this to be had?" "At home, in my house," rejoined she, and carrying him to his own house, knocked at the door. The lady opened to them, and ran in again to make an end of her dressing and perfuming, whilst the wicked old woman brought the man, who was the husband and housemaster, into the saloon, and made him sit down, congratulating herself on her cunning contrivance. Presently in walked the lady, who no sooner set eyes on her husband sitting by the old trot, than she knew him and guessed how the case stood. Nevertheless, she was not taken aback, and without stay or delay bethought her of a device to hoodwink him. So she pulled off her outer boot, and cried at her husband, "Is this how thou keepest the contract between us? How canst thou betray me, and deal thus with me? Know that when I heard of thy coming, I sent this old woman to try thee, and she hath made thee fall into that against I warned thee. So now I am certified of thine affair, and that thou hast broken faith with me. I thought thee chaste and pure, till I saw thee with mine own eyes in this old woman's company, and knew that thou didst frequent loose baggages." So saying, she fell to beating him with her slipper about the head, and crying out, "Divorce me, divorce me!" while he excused himself, and swore to her by Allah the Most High that he had never in his life been untrue to her, nor had done aught of that whereof she suspected him. But she stinted not to weep and scream and bash him, crying out and saying, "Come to my help, O Moslems!" till he laid hold of her mouth with his hand, and she bit it. Moreover, he humbled himself to her, and kissed her hands and feet, whilst she would not be appeased, and continued to cuff him. At last she winked at the old woman to come and hold her hand from him. So she came up to her, and kissed her hands and feet, till she made peace between them, and they sat down together, whereupon the husband began to kiss her hands, saying, "Allah Almighty requite thee with all good, for that thou hast delivered me from her." And the old woman marveled at the wife's cunning and ready wit. "This then, O king," said the Wazir, "is one of the many instances of the craft and malice and perfidy of women." When the king heard this story, he was persuaded by it, and turned from his purpose to slay his son. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 586th night, she said, it hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the fourth Wazir had told his tale, the king turned from his purpose to slay his son. But on the 5th day the damsel came in to him, hending a bowl of poison in hand, calling on heaven for help, and buffeting her cheeks and face, and said to him, O king, either thou shalt do me justice and avenge me on thy son, or I will drink up this poison cup and die, and the sin of my blood shall be on thy head at the day of doom. These thy ministers accuse me of malice and perfidy, but there be none in the world more perfidious than men. Hast thou not heard the story of the Goldsmith and the Cashmere Singing Girl? What befell the twain, O damsel? Asked the king. And he answered, saying, There hath come to my knowledge, O august king, the tale of the Goldsmith and the Cashmere Singing Girl. There lived once in the city of Persia a goldsmith who delighted in women and in drinking wine. One day, being in the house of one of his intimates, he saw painted on the wall the figure of a lutist, a beautiful damsel. Beholder never beheld a fairer or more pleasant. He looked at the picture again and again, marveling at its beauty, and fell so desperately in love with it that he sickened for passion and came near to die. It chanced that one of his friends came to visit him, and sitting down by his side, asked how he did and what aileth him, whereto the goldsmith answered, O my brother, that which ails me is love, and it befell me in a house where a figure of a woman painted on the household wall of my brother such an one, and became enamored of it. Hereupon the other fell to blaming him, and said, This was one of thy lack of wit. How canst thou fall in love with a painted figure on a wall, that can neither harm nor profit, that seeth nor heareth, that neither taketh nor withholdeth? Said the sick man, He who painted yonder picture never could have limned it save after the likeness of some beautiful woman. Happily, rejoiced his friend, he painted it from imagination. In any case, replied the goldsmith, here am I, dying for love of the picture, and if there live the original thereof in the world, I pray Allah Most High to protect my life till I see her. When those who were present went out, they asked for the painter of the picture, and finding that he had traveled to another town, wrote him a letter complaining of their comrade's case, and inquiring whether he had drawn the figure of his own inventive talents, or copied it from a living figure. To which he replied, I painted it after a certain singing girl belonging to one of the Wazirs in the city of Cashmere in the land of Hind. When the goldsmith heard this, he left Persia for Cashmere city, where he arrived after much travail. He tarried a while there till one day he went and clapped up an acquaintance with a certain of the citizens who was a druggist, a fellow of a sharp wit, keen, crafty, and being one eventide in company with him, asked him of their king and his polity, to which the other answered, saying, Well, our king is just and righteous in his governance, equitable to his lieges, and beneficent to his commons, and abhorreth nothing in the world save sorcerers. But whenever a sorcerer or sorceress falls into his hands, he casteth them into a pit without the city, and there leaveth them to hunger, to die. Then he questioned him of the king's wazirs, and the druggist told him of each minister, his fashion and condition, till the talk came round to the singing girl, and he told him, She belongeth to such a wazir. The goldsmith took note of the minister's abiding place, and waited some days till he had devised a device to his desire. And one night of rain and thunder and stormy winds, he provided himself with thieves' tackle, and repaired to the house of the wazir who owned the damsel. Here he hanged a rope ladder with grappling irons to the battlements, and climbed up to the terrace roof of the palace. Therein he descended to the inner court, and making his way into the harem, found all the slave girls lying asleep, each on her own couch, and amongst them reclining on a couch of alabaster, and covered with a coverlet of cloth of gold, a damsel, as she were the moon rising on a 14th night. At her head stood a candle of ambergris, and at her feet another, each in a candlestick of glittering gold, her brilliancy dimming them both, and under her pillow lay a casket of silver, wherein were her jewels. He raised the coverlid, and drawing near her, considered her straitly, and behold, it was the luntist whom he desired, and of whom he had come in quest. So he took out a knife, and wounded her in the back parts, a palpable outer wound, whereupon she awoke in terror. But when she saw him, she was afraid to cry out, thinking he came to steal her goods. So she said to him, Take the box, and what is therein, but slay me not, for I am in thy protection, and under thy safeguard, and in my death will profit thee nothing. Accordingly, he took the box, and went away. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease the telling of my tales for today, until it be morrow.